All right, thank you, Hampus. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today to talk about building a meaningful Apple Watch experience. Again, I'm Mike Oliver. I run the product engineering team at RunKeeper. Any RunKeeper users out there, hopefully? Yes? Okay, great. So for those who don't know, RunKeeper is a personal trainer app. If you were going to go out for a run, a walk, a bike ride, anything like that, we tell you how many calories you burned, how far you went, we let you share it with friends. And obviously, Apple Watch is a hugely important thing to us because health and fitness, as we'll talk about, and running in general is a big key part of the Apple Watch experience. In terms of what we're going to talk about today, really the main goal is to talk about what really makes a great watch app. We'll certainly focus a lot on Apple Watch, but for anybody out there who's interested in Android Wear and Pebble and Garmin and some of these other wearables, particularly the smartwatch variant of wearables, many of the things that we'll talk about will be relevant there as well. We're going to do that by looking at a lot of the key watch app use cases, some of the particular things that people are using more and more for Apple Watch. And we'll talk about some more generic tips and tricks with Apple Watch development so that you guys can really make the best apps that you can. My goal is for this to be really helpful and to have direct and specific feedback for anybody out there making Apple Watch apps. So we'll talk a little bit in code, we'll talk a little bit product-oriented, a little bit design, a little bit of everything. So before we get started, just a quick show of hands. How many people out there actually wear an Apple Watch on a daily basis? Yep, okay, everybody's showing them. I believe you. You can raise the other hand if you want to. And for those of you who don't wear an Apple Watch, you can look around at people who just raise their hands. These will be the ones who make sure that they stand up at 10 minutes to every hour, because you got to fill those rings. That's what Apple Watch is all about. And then also, how many people have actually done some active Apple Watch development? Okay, good. So a lot of us. So hopefully there will still be some things in here that will be helpful for people who have experience. And for those of you who are new to the platform as well, I hope that you get something out of it also. All right, so let's start by just talking about what makes a great watch app. And I think in order to frame this conversation, it's helpful to talk a bit about kind of the course of mobile development as it started in general. When mobile development really started, this transition from desktop to mobile that happened, there was a fair amount of evangelizing that had to be done early on. There were so many people who wanted to do all the wrong things on the left, who tried to take their entire website and just cram everything into the mobile app, tried to take their entire desktop app and just cram it all into an iPhone or an Android app or even a BlackBerry app if you go back that far. And everybody was looking to really solve every problem for every user out there. And it took a long time for a lot of people to realize that that was not the way to go, that mobile is different, you'll have a more successful mobile app by focusing on simplicity, by focusing on trimming down the level of functionality, and really focusing on what are the quick actions that a user can take in your mobile app. And at the time when mobile app development was really getting started, a lot of what we focused on are what are these key questions that can be answered in a short period of time? What can you get done in line at the grocery store? What can you get done while sitting at a stoplight? Maybe even in your car. Yes, there are people who use their phones while driving. It's a thing. Fast forward to watch development as it started a couple years ago, and I think a lot of people who got into watch development made a lot of similar mistakes. They tried to take everything from their mobile app and cram everything into the watch app. And you saw this when everybody really realized the watch as this potential just new gold rush that everybody felt had happened before with iPad and happened before with iPhone. Let's all get there as quickly as possible, and let's just put everything that we have in the mobile app into the watch. We're going to make it an extension of the phone in the same way that we made those same mistakes previously with the website and just get everything for every user. And again, turns out that's not the right thing to do, right? Even more so with the watch, it's that much more important to focus on a lot of the same things that are important in mobile development, focusing on, again, simplicity, focusing on trimming down the level of functionality, less is more in a lot of ways, and really giving users the opportunity to get things done incredibly quickly. You're really measuring the interactions that you do with Apple Watch in seconds as opposed to minutes. And frankly, I would argue it should be in less than 10 seconds. And when you think about that, you need to be thinking about how your users are going to get something done in less than 10 seconds. So I like to think about it similar to the last question of what are your users going to be able to get done in line at the grocery store? Now we need to be thinking about what are your users going to be able to get done in stride? What can they do literally by just glancing down at their watch and being able to move forward and simply keep going with their day? Because that's what Apple Watch is all about. Another question that I think is really important to be asking as you start to get into watch development is really, why are your users using their Apple Watch instead of their phone? The reality is most people, and this is true of Apple Watch, this is true of Android Wear, this is true of most wearables out there, they integrate so closely with the phone, you really need to make a compelling reason for your users to be using the watch, using your app on the watch, rather than taking out their phone and doing it. And I think that question really well frames thinking about what are the key use cases with the watch in general. And I like to boil them down into these three. So why would you use the watch over the phone? First and foremost, sometimes it's simply faster than taking out your phone. Whether your phone's in your pocket, in your bag, sitting on your desk, there are some things that it's simply faster to glance down at your wrist and keep moving, right? So that's one key reason why people use their watch over their phone. Another great reason is the health hardware that's on the watch. So there's a heart rate monitor, there's growing more and more sensors being built into these wearables, and because they are pretty close to directly attached to your body, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do in the health and fitness space because of that. And then third, I would say a little bit more of a narrow use case, but there are simply some times where your hands are tied, where your phone doesn't make sense because maybe your hands are messy because you're cooking, or maybe you're walking around the grocery store and taking things off the shelf and it's hard to get at your phone. There are some times where your hands are simply preoccupied, where using your watch can be incredibly beneficial. So thinking about these three reasons why you would use your watch over your phone, these really allow us to focus on what I consider to be the four key use cases of an Apple Watch, or really of any wearable. The first being notifications, right? You get a notification, you want to be able to glance down, see it, and move on with your life. The flip side to that, I'll call the update glance, is I don't get a notification necessarily, but I know that there's something interesting that I want to see. So I glance down at my watch and I see it. Again, health and fitness, huge use case, huge space within the Apple Watch. We'll spend some time talking a little bit more in depth about that use case later. And then the narrow use case that I think is really compelling in some instances, which I'll call situational awareness, right? So being in a very specific situation and using Apple Watch to really augment that for your users. So we'll talk about, for much of the rest of the presentation, we'll basically go through each of these four use cases in detail. So first, notifications. I think that notifications are in general the most important thing that you should be thinking about with Apple Watch. It is the thing that your users are spending really the most time interacting with on their Apple Watch, right? So whether it's with your app or with other standard apps on the watch, notifications is probably the majority of the time that your users are spending on the watch. And I think something that's misunderstood with Apple Watch, or just at least not top of mind that should be, whether or not you're doing watch development today, your users are already interacting with your app on Apple Watch through the notifications that you do. So when we talk about notifications being really this critical part of Apple Watch development, not only is that because your users are doing so much with notifications on the watch today, they are already interacting with your app today on their watch. That can be a bit mind-blowing, but it's really important. So notification strategy is Apple Watch strategy. They are one and the same to start with. And so I'd encourage you to think about, you can improve your watch experience without doing watch development to start with. So a lot of people are wondering, should I be doing watch development? Are there really enough users? Maybe, maybe not. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. What I think is important, though, is that even before you get into watch development, you can be improving your experience for users through notifications. The best way to do that is really to start with notification actions. This is something that, for anybody who remembers when Apple Watch came out in tandem really with iOS 8, iOS 8 introduced this idea of notification actions, and frankly, I think that they were done in part to be tightly tied with Apple Watch. For those who don't know what a notification action is, it's essentially the red arrows down at the bottom of the calendar notification that I talked about earlier. Think of them as very simple user operations, something that a user can do very quickly, very easily, with one hand, all the things that make sense to do on an Apple Watch. These could be a ton of different use cases. This could be something as simple as snooze and remind me about this in 20 minutes. It could be delete the email that I got because I just don't care about it because email. It could be I got a message from somebody and I want to respond quickly with just one word. The ability to make this decision quickly for your users is what the watch is all about, because ultimately it saves them time later on their phone, on their desktop, whatever, because they've already addressed whatever the notification is that came in. And again, the coolest thing about this is that all the code that you need to get this done can be done in your iPhone app. You don't have to do any code whatsoever in a watch app. You don't have to get a watch app off the ground to start with. All the code can be in your phone app. Here's just an example of the code. So again, I'll make sure that these slides are on my Twitter account, and I know we'll be recording this, so you guys will be able to get back to this. This is a very simple code sample of how you can get a notification action done. Essentially, you obviously request permission to be doing notifications first, and then the key lines in here, that read action and that action category, essentially the red action in the action category. The action is the button that's going to show up, and you can essentially say for a given category of notification that I'm going to get, these are the actions that I want to show up. In this case, I've said for this action category, the only thing that I want to show up is mark as red. But if I also wanted to put in delete or remind or anything like that, I can simply make more actions and drop them into the array when I create the UI notification category. And then I'm just setting notification categories on the notification center. Now, at some point, hopefully, or if it makes sense for your users, you'll likely want to go beyond just the basic notifications that you can do with an iPhone app. A great place to start with Apple Watch development is custom notifications. But a couple things that I think are important about Apple Watch notifications: make sure you're keeping it simple. Remember, again, your users are doing this in stride. They're doing this while walking across the street. They want to be able to glance down, see what's going on their watch, and move on. The most important thing that I find with that, not only as a developer, but as a user, if at all possible, attempt to avoid scrolling, right? When you avoid scrolling, you're making it so that you can do something with one hand. You don't have to use the other hand and flip through. You're also making it so that everything that you need is visible on the screen at once. Dark Sky, really good example of an app that does this well. For those who don't know, Dark Sky is a weather app. Their big deal is they want to be able to tell you if it's going to rain within the next hour, because if it is, get inside or get a raincoat or whatever it is that you need to do. They have put a lot of information into one very small notification, and I think done so really well, again, without having to scroll. Flip side to this, I won't call out any apps specifically, but you see a lot of news apps that have come along that have tried to embrace custom notifications on the watch. Images are a big part of news stories often, and it boggles my mind how many of them put the image and then the text, the headline, below. So when I look at my watch, I see big image and no context whatsoever of what the headline actually is. You have to scroll to get the headline. A better option for that use case would probably be find a way to either put the image behind the headline or maybe even the headline above and allow users to scroll to see the rest of the image. Okay, that's notifications. Let's move forward and talk about the update glance. Here, good example of a good update glance app would be, this is the ESPN app. I enjoy sports a fair amount, so you'll hear me use sports a fair amount in some of the references. The update glance, as I mentioned before, is about users wanting to know something quickly, but it's kind of the juxtaposed use case to the push notification. The push notification is I, as a user, don't know something's going on, but suddenly you're alerting me to something that's going on, so I'm going to look down at it. The update glance is I, as a user, do know that something's going on, and I want to be able to glance down and see whatever the biggest update is about that, whether that's a sports score, whether that's I know my ride is coming and I want to know where it is, I want to know weather is happening, I want to know what the weather's like, things like that. For those of you who've been paying attention to watch development since day one, you'll remember that glance is a bit of a loaded term. For a while, the glance was a specific kind of watch app that they have since killed off. So I don't mean to use that term as it has to be a glance app. Frankly, it could be a complication. It could be a full watch app. There's a lot of different ways to try and solve this use case. And frankly, I think the fact that the glance app itself is gone is good because it just simplifies development for us as developers. The key thing I think is important to think about when you're thinking about the glance app. Let Morpheus be in your mind if it helps you, right? What if I told you you could find out information as quickly as knowing the time when you glance at your wrist? That's what you should be thinking about for your users. They need to be able to know whatever the information is in a split second. This is the use case that probably needs to be done the fastest on Apple Watch. If your users are going to spend more than 2 seconds trying to figure this out, they're not going to bother. They're going to move on to something else, to either a different app or just not using it. The most important thing you can do to help your users know information quickly is make sure that you know the information within the app before they need to go get it, which is a really hard problem to solve. Luckily, there are a lot of background tasks that you can leverage to really help you get this done. A background task ultimately is your app is potentially not running at all, or at least not running in the foreground. Your app has the ability to go out and get something done even though it's not running when the system loads you up, so that when the user looks down at you later or interacts with you later, you have everything that you need. These are incredibly critically important. On the left, we're talking about things that are explicitly within your watch code. There are 2 key ones in my mind. First, there's the network one, or the class name WK application refresh background task, because that's obviously easy to remember. All you really need to know about it is this is a task that the watch can decide, I'm going to start you up, I'm going to start your app up. You can go out and make a network call, download whatever it is that you need, and have that information ready and available for the user. So that one's incredibly powerful. The second is strictly an interface refresh task, refresh background task. The point of this one is whether you just got back some information from possibly a network request, or maybe you're doing something that doesn't need any network request at all, like a step tracking app or a heart rate monitoring app. The snapshot or interface refresh background request allows you to change the UI when you're in the background so that your UI is ready and you don't have to calculate or do anything when the user looks down. This is particularly important too if you're so lucky for your users to put you in the dock. So remember, the dock is the thing that replaced glance apps. If you're in the dock, you want your UI to be up to date when your users look at it in the dock. You do that primarily through this snapshot refresh background task. The thing that I think people underestimate when doing background tasks for watch development is that you can also leverage the background tasks on your iPhone app. This is really important because, particularly for these network requests, at least right now, the way Apple's done it, just from personal experience, background tasks, background refresh on iPhone happens a lot more regularly throughout the day than your background task on your watch will get fired. So if you're doing something where you can share data between your watch app and your iPhone app, I definitely recommend using the background tasks on iPhone as well, because they will help you get more opportunities to get data. There's 2 big ones here that I think are really important and impactful. The first one being the periodic wake, which is basically me saying, hey, iPhone, whenever you think it's convenient, I would love to go out and do something. So you can do this, and you can fetch something from the network, you can read something off the device, you can do a lot of different things with it. Side note, a little bit different from this presentation, but also incredibly powerful. You can, in background fetch, you can schedule a local notification. So you can go out and query your server, find out if there's new information, and then if there is, start something up. Really powerful. The other powerful thing that's here on the iPhone app is you can do background push, which is I want to send my user a notification, but really I just want my app to wake up and get new data. So again, if I'm a sports app and I know so-and-so just scored a run, a touchdown, whatever, I can send a push notification to all my users, not necessarily send them a notification and say, hey, touchdown, but I can simply update the score in the background. So that's also really powerful. Code, hopefully helpful. So if you want to do a simple watch background task, this is basically all you need. The top method I make just as a convenience method to kind of hide the complexity of this schedule background refresh method on the WK extension. Once you have that, once you have scheduled an actual background refresh, the method that will get called in your watch code is this handle background task method. And the only real important thing here, you get a list of background tasks. You can figure out what type of background task you have. You can run through them, and you can do whatever it is that you want to do. In this case, I'm downloading user data. Also important at the end of this method is simply telling the system that your task has been completed. Part of the reason that's important is that Apple, the watch itself, will decide how often it should wake you up for some of these background tasks based on whether or not you actually finish your task. So if you never tell it that you're finishing your task, the watch will think that it's taking you too long to get things done, and it will decide, you know what, we're not going to wake you up as often as you want to be woken up. If you create a new watch app in Xcode today, this method will be stubbed out for you. It'll also be stubbed out for you with all of the different kinds of background tasks in there. So you can see not only the snapshot one that we talked about before, but there's a couple of other very specific esoteric use cases around syncing with the iPhone app or other things. Definitely worth looking at if you're thinking about starting to play with this. I did want to talk a little bit about complications as well in the context of the update glance. So again, most important with complications, I think less is more. You have a very limited small amount of space. Don't try and shove everything into it. Give the user just exactly what they need. Again, Morpheus just seeing as quickly as they can figure out the time. Updating live data is really hard with a complication. You essentially have to get this giant push notification architecture where you're sending everything to the complication. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying go into it with open eyes. Something that Apple has changed their recommendations or tune on a little bit. They're now accepting complications that are nothing but a link into your app. Consider that not only because it's great real estate for you with your users to get them into your app, but also because it's helpful, right? So if you have an app that you think is critical for your users to get into, give them the opportunity to do it as quickly as possible without going into that crazy circular icon mess that nobody can ever find anything in. The other thing that I think is really impactful too, with watchOS 3, I was highly skeptical that I would ever use this, but they made this thing of multiple watch faces, right? So you can have not only the face that you use on a daily basis, but maybe a different face that you have at work or other things. I was skeptical. I actually use this now. I think it's cool. And what's impactful there to you as a developer is that there's essentially more real estate for you to have a complication in. So for example, I have a watch face that I prefer to use when I'm at work that has things like my calendar notifications in it and other things. I also have a watch face that I use when I'm not inside work that has my ESPN score tracker or whatever. I probably wouldn't have enough real estate to do the ESPN score tracker if I didn't have the ability to do multiple watch faces. Okay. Let's talk about health and fitness. And yes, this is a screenshot of RunKeeper. It's another shameless plug to go use RunKeeper and download it. We obviously think it's great. Obviously, health and fitness is a huge use case within Apple Watch. This is a screenshot of the, yes, older iOS 10 watch store before they did the huge App Store redesign. This is not filtered to the health and fitness category. This is just what they show in the featured main page. And you can see that literally every app that's on here is a health and fitness app. So it's a huge use case and a huge category that Apple is clearly thinking about. The thing that is crazy to me and so impactful when you're doing health and fitness apps is how many special privileges you get as a health and fitness app within the watch. And it's mainly these three. You're allowed to operate in the background with, if you think about, most apps get 2 to 3 seconds in the foreground while their users are using them, and they drop their wrist and the thing goes dark. As a health and fitness app, the ability to operate in the background is huge. The ability to also essentially stay in the foreground and say when the user raises their wrist again, I want to be the app that shows up, not the watch face, not anything else like that, is incredibly powerful for you as a developer. And the fact that you can start it from the phone. So this is the only way that I know of that on the phone you can do something that will actually automatically trigger the watch to do something, turn on, bring your app up, etc. So health and fitness apps, for you as a developer, if you're doing a health and fitness app, you have a lot of additional things that you can do. Most of those things that you can do are keyed off of this HK workout session class. It's easily the most powerful thing that I've found in the API itself. It's definitely also worth just going to that documentation. I don't point to documentation often. Most Apple documentation is dry and says exactly what it does. This page actually outlines for you a lot of the different use cases that you can actually do, including some of the code that I have here. So this code is some of the very simple stuff for just creating a HealthKit workout session and starting it up. That's all you need to do for those first two use cases. So if you want to be able to operate more in the background and you want to be able to, when your users pick their wrist up, to be the app in the foreground, this is all the code you need. Starting the HK workout session does all that for you. Worth pointing out too, if you want to do the background thing, you do also have to set the WK background mode to workout processing. As of watchOS 3, workout processing was the only WatchKit background mode. I believe in iOS 4, there's 1 or 2 new ones for like audio processing as well. And then more code, just to be helpful. So this is the way to set up code to start something from the phone on the watch. So at the top, you see the phone code. Basically, again, you're doing something very similar. You set up the workout configuration, and then you simply call this health store start watch app with a nice little closure for the fact that it's working. When you do that, the Apple Watch code in the bottom half, the handle method gets called, and you're essentially passed in the workout configuration that you did on the phone. You can then start your workout session however you please. I apologize if I lost everybody who's not doing health and fitness apps, but if I did, pay attention again, because I think this is relevant. I don't know if you actually have to start a workout when you do this. Not something that I would go and advocate for doing or asking Apple about, but it's worth thinking about. If there's a way that you want to try and start your watch app, try this method, for lack of a better term. Maybe it'll work. I think it'll probably work until you get caught, but it's worth thinking about. And I think sometimes those creative use cases can be really helpful for what you're doing. Okay, last category that we'll talk about, this situational awareness category that I talk about. I think this app is a really good example of it. This is the iTranslate app. Essentially, what you can do is if you have the app on your watch, you're, I don't know, in a foreign country, maybe Norway, where you don't speak the language, you can use Siri to have it hear what you're saying, and then it will it'll essentially translate live for you and say it for you so that you don't sound like an ignorant American. I think when you're talking about situational awareness, it is important to point out that there are very few apps that do this really well. I think it's an incredibly hard thing to do. It's worth calling out because this is a category of apps that is incredibly impactful, but recognize that it's really hard to do it well. The best ones that I've seen do this are doing a really deep hardware integration of some kind or another. iTranslate doing a Siri integration. This is a screenshot of the Keynote app. So if you're doing a presentation, you can simply swipe on your watch to go to the next slide. So big Bluetooth integration there. A lot of the other apps that are really good at this are doing iBeacon integrations or location-aware things. So you're walking into a ballpark or a stadium, and you get a different experience because it's aware of what you're doing. Apple Store, another really good one. I think the important thing to realize is that these are all very single-purpose apps. They really only do one very core, simple thing when you are in this situation that this thing is aware of. So be conscious of that as you get into this use case. Okay. Other tips and tricks, a few other things that I wanted to go over before we finish up, just so that I think this is applicable largely regardless of what kind of watch app you're doing. Maybe the most important thing, and I probably buried the lead on this, is before you do much with Apple Watch, know how many of your users actually have an Apple Watch today and whether or not they're going to install your app. This 5-6 lines of code, whatever it is really all you need. That first line, wcsession.is supported, basically tells you whether or not your users have a watch or not. It's incredibly impactful that you can do all that in one line. So I would say, like, if you have an analytics engine somewhere in your app today, just go and put this in now. Frankly, just out of curiosity, how many of your apps, how many of your users have a watch? And then second, this is watch app installed method will also tell you if you did make a custom Apple Watch app, did your users actually install it? In my experience, generally speaking, the vast majority of users will have your watch app installed. Apple's default behavior is to install all apps onto your watch, which again makes that screen with all the circular icons a total mess, and probably why they're de-emphasizing that. But it's cool to know that generally speaking, if you do a watch app, it'll probably be there on your user's watch, and you don't have to worry about that download action that can be frictionful. One of the things that's really hard to grasp with Apple Watch is how are you going to communicate from your watch to your phone and back and forth? And the reality is Apple has created a lot of different options for you, which is good, but they all have varying strengths and weaknesses. And it's frankly too specific to really talk about with any given app to talk generically about which one's better, which one's worse. I would just encourage you to know all the different things that you can do to communicate. So it could be something as simple as you have a shared data store between your iPhone app and your watch app. That could be something as simple as just a shared key value pair data store, or it could be something more complex like file structures, and I believe you can even do core data. I'm not a core data guy. That's a different presentation. There are also asynchronous updates. So you can do something where you say, my watch app needs to communicate with my iPhone app at some point in the future. It's not necessary for it to be right this second, but anytime within the next 30 seconds would be great. That's helpful sometimes. Other times you need something much more immediate, and so you'd have this immediate messaging set up where the watch will talk directly to the phone instantaneously. Sometimes that's successful, sometimes that's not. You can even do a full file transfer. So if you record audio on the watch and you want to send that audio file to the phone, that option is available to you. This is the only other documentation that I'll point to in this presentation. It's worth, if you're thinking about how to communicate between your watch app and your phone app, it's worth going to this documentation to get a primer for what these different communication styles or architectures are like, what their pros and cons are, and how you should decide which one you should do. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the Apple Watch LTE. I feel like within the past month since they announced it, or even the months prior, as people really started to get the rumor mill going, you kind of start to hear the same things again of people saying, oh, LTE on the watch, gold rush, let's all go and let's build everything. And As a technologist, I'm excited when people are building things, but again, let's focus on the use cases, right? So I think the Apple Watch LTE is going to be really great for notifications for all of us as users, right? There are going to be times where you don't have your phone on you, or your phone is in your bag while you're at the gym or something, if you want to leave it there, and you'll still be able to get your notifications, which I think is great. For us as developers, I think the important thing to think about is, why do your users have their watch on them and they don't have their phone on them? Once you figure that out, then figure out what you potentially want to do with it, not the other way around. Don't simply try and do something with the LTE on the watch just because it's there. Figure out why it is that your users have their watch and not the phone. And then also, just recognize the syncing headaches that may come up with having two devices that are connected to the internet. So today, pretty much everything you do on your watch, if you need to sync it to a server somehow, it's going to go through your phone first. So you can have a relatively straight line path of do something on the watch, it syncs to the phone, and then everything that happens on the phone syncs to the server. If you've got two devices that are internet connected now, you have two different options. You could go from the watch to the phone to the server, or you could go from your watch to the server and then back down to the phone. That can create a whole lot of different complications for you, where you might be duplicating data if you're not careful. You might be just causing yourself to make more server calls if you're not aware. So be aware of the potential for there be dragons there, so to speak, and make sure that you're aware of that. Okay. In closing, just to reiterate a couple points, what makes great watch apps? Again, we focus on brief interactions. What can your users get done in stride? What can your users get done in less than 10 seconds, in less than 5 seconds? Your best watch apps are going to leverage a lot of these different key use cases. They're probably, regardless of the other use cases that they might employ, are going to be doing something with notifications. But they might also be doing things as an update glance or a health app, or they may be highly situational. And most importantly, as is true for really all technology solutions, leverage the technology that's there to solve a problem. Don't create the solution and then try and find the problem later. Think about what is it that your users want to do with the watch and go from there. Don't just go the gold rush scenario. So that was everything that I wanted to cover today. Thank you guys for listening. If you do have any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or I know we're also doing things through Slack, so happy to do them there as well. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent talk. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, can you name a really great Apple Watch app that is not RunKeeper?
Ah, come on! I'm like, well, let's see. I mentioned Dark Sky before. I really like Dark Sky, not only for the complication that they have, but also just the notification strategy I feel like is really good. What's that? I'm trying to think of one that I didn't use in the presentation. I'm gonna look at my watch and see what some of the things that are there.
An Apple app also.
Yeah, I think that the calendar app is pretty good. I find I don't feel like their notifications use the space as much as well as they could, and it's frustrating. We at RunKeeper, we're on the Google stack, so I often find that I'm getting both Apple notifications and Google notifications. So, but the calendar app I think is another decent one. Yeah.
You think there are any challenges between the different watch sizes available, between the 42 and 38 millimeter?
On the development side, I think the challenges are relatively straightforward. The UI paradigms, while not being strictly auto layout, they're similar in that you can decide like this thing is going to be on the left side, these things are going to be equal width, things like that. So for development, I don't think that the challenges are that great. I think for design, the challenges are huge. I think for me personally, I'm biased towards the big watch because that's what I have. So it's easy for me to forget I need to also think about making this smaller, whatever the screen is, making the UI a little bit more compact, or at least compactable for the smaller device.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
We have the challenge with we have developing an Apple Watch app with the QR code,
Mm-hmm.
and we found out a little late that the scanners are from the bottom, so you have to turn your wrist.
Yeah.
I understand the problem.
Yeah. I know that there are some new APIs in watchOS 4 that allow you to explicitly say, I forget what the name of the mode is called, but it's like a sharing mode. So first of all, when you flip your wrist, it will automatically turn it over, so that if you're showing somebody, they're not looking at it upside down. It will also keep the screen on explicitly. So rather than say, like the watch, essentially when you flip your wrist over, the watch through accelerometer realizes, oh, you're not looking at it, let me save battery, which is probably the problem that you're running into with QR codes. Yep. But so if you flip that API on, it will keep the screen on, or at least it promises to keep the screen on so that you can show it to somebody else. I would expect that if you keep going like that, it will still keep the screen on, so that hopefully it'll help solve that problem.
When will that be released?
It was released in September.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Already available.
Right. I saw a question up there. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Sorry, what?
So he said United, which is an airline in the U.S.
Yeah, okay. So they have the app that works.
Cool. I think I saw a question down here.
How many of your users do have an Apple Watch?
Yeah, so it's still a low percentage, right? So the majority of our users are phone only, let's say. I tried to look up the exact stat and was shot down by the data guy. What I think has been interesting is to see the relative ramp up and slowdown of some of the different wearables. So we launched a Pebble integration when Pebble first came on the market 5 or so years ago, and it was interesting to see that jump up really quickly and has had kind of a slow and steady decline over the past few years. And recently I know they were acquired by Fitbit, and the Pebble platform is being shut down. But similarly, there's been an interesting ramp up in Apple Watch with a greater hockey stick effect. And Garmin as well was slower to pick up, but has certainly picked up a lot since then. I can say we actually have more Garmin users than we have Apple Watch users. Garmin is our biggest wearable platform, which is not something that I would have expected, and is probably also very specific to RunKeeper and our use case. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Artificial intelligence,
Mm.
situational awareness, and these kind of things.
Yeah.
Do you find any use cases, or do you see any development there?
I can't say I've seen development on it. I can absolutely say that it's clear that Apple is moving more and more towards machine learning and artificial intelligence, as is that like the next wave. You know, you even heard at Google I/O the CEO talking about them shifting from a mobile first company to an AI first company. So I think that those things are absolutely going to happen and are starting to happen. One caveat that I would put to it is, we are our devices are getting smaller, largely, or at least when you talk about the watch, that device is incredibly small, and the processing power is limited, right? So in the same way that when we first got into phone development 10 years ago and had to be careful about how much processing can you get done, that's going to be true on the watch as well. So I think that to do a successful AI machine learning play on the watch, it's going to have to leverage more than just the processing power of on the watch, whether that's on the phone or on a server somewhere. Yeah. Sorry.
Your accessibility is a big theme. Larger text, text to speech, etc.
Mhm.
Does the Apple Watch support this?
I'm not as familiar with accessibility as I probably should be. So I can't speak to whether or not you can make fonts bigger or smaller in the same accessibility settings that you do on iPhone. I also, iPhone has an incredibly powerful vision impaired mode as well that will go through and talk about the different elements. I will freely admit that I don't know if that's there on the watch or not. I would expect, I mean, Apple has been pretty good about accessibility and being on the forefront and making that available. So I would expect that that it's there on the watch, but I don't know honestly. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, it changed, I believe, in 10.3. So when I believe SiriKit started in iOS 10, and that was strictly on the phone. When Siri, I believe in 10.3, they said they basically took all of SiriKit and embedded it in the watch as well. SiriKit is another really complicated thing because SiriKit involves at least one, if not potentially two, extensions of your application. So essentially, for anybody who doesn't know what SiriKit is, it's basically as a user, you tell Siri, "Hey Siri, I want to go for a run with RunKeeper." And then Siri knows to load up RunKeeper, do some magic to the words to essentially translate them into a command to tell RunKeeper to do something. That whole process is an extension of your application. And then if you want to respond to Siri with UI, that UI is an additional extension. All of those things operate largely as a wholly separate application to your core application, which again is also a wholly separate application to your watch extension. So it's been incredibly complex. I guess I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
We'll cut the questions down.
Sure.
So you can always ask Mike later.
Yep. So I should be there on Slack. I'm in this room as well, so I'll go through. If anybody has any other questions, just drop them in the Slack room for this, or find me in the big blue sweatshirt. Happy to talk about RunKeeper or Apple Watch or anything else. Thank you, everyone.